Hi, everybody. I'm Eugene Ostashevsky. I'm Zhenya Ostashevsky, and I am very happy to be able to give this very short address as part of defining Russian literature and search for the language. And I want to thank Zarina and Kevin for the opportunity. I can't do this live because I'm in Shanghai, so at the moment, and it'll be in the middle of the night when you guys are on. But I look forward to watching, to watching what you do. So you better be good. Um, okay, I want to start with the word Russian in Russian literature. So my Russian identity is, in a certain sense, it's a product of American culture. I came when I was 11. Before I came, I was Jewish. It's not like I was Russian. I became Russian around the age of 11 when we immigrated, and I started to become white even later than that. So it's very hard for me to take American identities as natural. Because even now in a globalized world, when American identities have become much more powerful, you get on a plane and you go somewhere else, and actually your identities are different. They're not the same. Um, they're products of local historical forces. My Russian language it's not always correct. At least it's never pure. I put in non-Russian words. Although I have to say that contemporary Russian, which is completely full of badly understood, now I'm going to be snobbish, of badly understood English words, very full. I don't know what pure Russian might be like, but I often hear or I often feel, with Russian speakers from Russia, that this kind of sentiment that, well, we don't say it this way in Russia in quite the way in which you say this. Russian is a language with an extremely imperialist, classist language ideology because of serfdom. It served as a class marker, it served as a different class marker during the revolution. You know, I say, okay, well, this is how we speak Russian in the Russian dialect of New York, and not everybody likes that. With Americans, I've gotten questions like after a poetry reading, who translates you? It's like you were just listening to my poems and you think somebody could translate that. Um, or sometimes I get, your language, your English is so good, right? Which is something that Americans who are about half my age are incentivized to take offense at. But I never learned how to do that. So I generally answer, thank you. Yours also. Where did you learn it? Um, so, um, my poetry. Okay. Clausewitz, right? The famous line by Clausewitz that war is a continuation of politics by other means. My American poetry is a continuation of Russian poetry by other means. But in poetry, it's the means that determine everything. Form generates content. By form, I don't necessarily mean meter and rhyme. I mean, meter and rhyme are incidental. I mean, the kind of social scripts, the rules for exchanges, all these implicit rules that you take on by entering a dialogue, because if you depart from them too far, you're not going to be in the dialogue. Um, this focus on language is to some extent Russian. Although in American language poetry, what I said about social scripts, I think they would subscribe to that. Um, um, but, they were also interested in, or are also interested in Russian formalism. So, anyway, so what does it mean to be American? The structure of being American is very different from the structure of being Russian. If you write in Russian, you're a Russian poet. It doesn't matter where you are. American is not a language I mean, it's not a language for Americans, right? It's a language for some Europeans into German. In German, you translate into German from the American, right? In France, you translate into French from the American, right, as opposed to from the English. But Americans think they speak and write in English, um, uh, which linguistically is true, but it's also culturally it's weird, and I wonder what the effects of that on the culture are, if any. Whether there's some kind of language trauma that's associated with being American. But the fact that Americans write in English automatically makes the issue of what poetry is American poetry as opposed to Canadian poetry, Irish poetry, Australian poetry, English poetry, Scottish poetry, blah, 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 into an issue of ideology, identity, and culture. Because American poetry is invested, right? And I use the word invested advisedly because of our creative writing programs and because it happens at universities, in not being Canadian, not being Irish, right? Not being English. It's the same thing with Canadian poetry. Like I was once sitting on a couch in Toronto watching TV, and there was an ad came up for Canadian poetry, and it said there's lots of great books in the world, and some of the best are written by Canadians. And I was like, whoa, I can't believe I just saw that. And it just shows you the way this kind of Canadian poetry is not American poetry, and the other way around. It shows the problem with defining things by culture and identity and tradition as opposed to language when the language is shared. Because, I mean, at least a problem that applies to me. Okay, so like me, all right, as a New York Jew, as a New York Russian Jew, right? Who am I culturally and ideologically closer to? Is this going to be an Anglo guy in, I don't know, South Carolina, or you know, anywhere in rural America, really, or is it going to be another Ashkenazi Jew from Montreal or from Toronto, right? To me, the answer is obvious, right? So, like, what is the American and American poetry for me? Like, I'm talking to you from Shanghai. Here, I'm going to show you Shanghai, right? I don't know if you can see this. Shanghai, like, in the foreground, you get fake Paris, right? Can you see the fake Paris? And in the background, you get fake Kupchina. I don't know if you can see the fake Kupchina, but yes, or Prospect Mira or something like that. So I'm talking to you from Shanghai. I live in Berlin. I identify with New York, right? It's just like Harms. Harms at one point said, I can't really relate to Russia. I'm patriotic, but my patriotism was only about Petersburg. This is exactly how I feel about New York, or a particular kind of urban culture associated with New York, right? So in a sense that extends to Philadelphia, Boston, maybe SF, of places that I've lived. I realize this is imperialism. Yes, maybe I do think of Philadelphia subconsciously as a kind of an outer borough. Sorry. But like, okay, but what's Russian about my poetry? I think of like, now that I live mainly in Europe, I don't do much FaceTime in the US, and like a Russian, I've started just posting my poems on Facebook because I mean, magazine publication is great, but I mean, you send it, then it comes out in 2 years and no one reads it. But on Facebook, I'm read mostly by global Russians or by Slavists who are basically naturalized global Russians. And for Russians, I think it's very important that somebody writes in English in a way that they can relate to, in a way that has to do with linguistic experiment, in a way that comes out, that is grounded in Russian literature, in Russian poetry, and in European poetry in general. Uh, in that sense, I think my work validates being Russian, validates being global Russian, and it's a validation that's emotionally needed. Like if you look at our parents' generation, it was very, very important for them that the poetry that Brodsky wrote in English is real poetry. Um, um, I mean, because and that has to do with the special, incredibly powerful place of English in the world. English is the imperial language. English is how you reach the outside world, right? If you're a Russian writer and you want international recognition, right, you're at the mercy of English. You're at the mercy of your translators. Same for writers in any other language. A friend was telling me yesterday that when a book comes out, a poetry book comes out in China, you get like a tiny run is tens of thousands of copies, right? Which is the equivalent of our 300 or 500. But you don't translate it; it stays in China, right? What happens in China stays in China unless there's English. It's the same thing with Russian. And I think this is crappy. I think this is bullshit, right? I think it's the response. I mean, in as much as there is a responsibility, I think it's the responsibility of writers like me, of writers with like dubious, foggy, hybrid, chimerical backgrounds, to stretch, to alienate, to foreignize English, to make English more of an international language, more receptive to the needs of people for whom it's not native. Um, uh, for me, right, there's, in the field of language, uh, decolonization for me involves de-Americanization. It's about sabotaging American monolingualism, and it's about relativizing cultural norms and relativizing poetic practices that come with being an American poet. And this is why I'm of two minds about translation. I want American poets to read foreign languages. I want them to become global poets. And I think being global is being multilingual. Thanks. I'm going to end on that note.